My name is Karen, and we are so honored to have these two incredible authors here tonight. So we have people coming from RJ Julia Booksellers, from our sister store Wesley and RJ Julia, and Bookhampton. So we have a crowd tonight, so it's totally spectacular. So first, I'd like to introduce Julie Clark, who's going to be in conversation with Laura. Julie Clark is the New York Times best-selling author of The Last Flight, and it seems that The Last Flight debuted on the New York Times paperback list, which is totally awesome. So welcome, Julie.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
And as our main event tonight, we have Laura Dave, and loved her author description in her book. So I'm going to read that because I think it's spectacular. So Laura Dave is the national and international best-selling author of several critically acclaimed novels, including 800 Grapes and The First Husband. Her work has been published in 18 countries, and 5 of her novels, including The Last Thing He Told Me, have been optioned for film and television. And can I say, New York Times #1, New York Times best-selling book. Oh my gosh. Welcome, Laura Dave. Julie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. I'm so excited to be here. I absolutely adore Laura. I loved this book when I read it. The premise is so clever, and it's so catching and so intriguing, and I could not put it down. I read it in probably a day and a half, and then was really mad at myself that I read it so quickly. You know, it's one of those books where when it's done, you're like, why did I do that? You know, it's like eating the entire chocolate cake and then thinking like, I could have had this across 3 days or 4 or 5, and I ate it in 1. But I didn't feel sick after reading The Last Thing He Told Me. So that's the good part. I felt really, really great. The ending is phenomenal, and absolutely it carries through the entire way. So Laura, I would like you to tell us a little bit about what this book is about. Just give us your little elevator pitch there.
Sure, absolutely. And I do have to just start by saying that this is such a treat. The way that Julie and I actually met is that I fangirled her and sent her a note when her book came out last year, which I have right here too. And if you haven't read it yet, you have to read it because it is fabulous. And I knew it was going to be fabulous before I even read it. I had a feeling I was going to love it. Someone recommended it. I think it was Ashley Spivey that I saw. And so when I went and picked it up at my local bookstore, it hadn't been signed yet. And they said, she's coming in to sign. I said, I don't want to wait. I'm going to just take it now. And so I remember I read it. And so I sent Julie a note as soon as I finished. And luckily we've gotten to become friends, so this is a real treat at the end of a busy week. So thank you for taking time out, Julie, because I know how busy you are.
I'm happy to do it. Happy. Okay, pitch the book.
So the book is about, also has last in the title, The Last Thing He Told Me, and it focuses on a woman, Hannah Hall, who has recently located to Sausalito, California, because she has gotten married, and her husband and his 16-year-old daughter live there. And while the marriage is off to a great start, the stepdaughter, Bailey, wants very little to do with her, and yet she's working it out. They're trying to blend this family together when out of nowhere, her new husband's tech firm is raided by the FBI, and her husband goes missing, leaving in his wake only a cryptic note that says, protect her. And Hannah knows that note refers to his daughter, Bailey, but she doesn't know anything else. Owen is not answering her phone calls or her emails, and she is left with this 16-year-old to try to figure out why her husband has disappeared, where he has gone to, and if she ever really knew the man that she married. And that is where we pick up with her on page 8. I didn't give any spoilers. That's the beginning of the book.
It's really incredible. And so, and really it's just high speed from there. So this book took you a really long time to write. Can you talk us through a little bit about how this story came to be for you and why it took so long?
So it started for me all the way back in 2003. And I was very interested in the Enron trial, and I watched in the Enron case. At that point, it hadn't even gone to trial yet. And everything that was going on there, I thought, I think for me, the story of Enron became fascinating. It was a story about hubris and lost humanity and all these things. And I watched an interview with Kenneth Lay's wife, Kenneth Lay being the CEO of Enron, and his wife, Linda Lay, who went on the Today Show and said, my husband's done nothing wrong. And I have no verdict on whether she meant that, but I started to imagine a woman who did find herself newly married to a man who the world is telling her is someone, and she believes in her heart to be someone else. And that was sort of running around in my head until 2012, when I sat down and started writing. And when I did, I realized that if I was going to attempt to write this as a thriller, I wanted it to be a thriller rooted in hope. And what I mean by that is I didn't want it to center on betrayal or revenge, and something I want to ask you about, Julie, when we start talking about The Last Flight, because I think that you do that so elegantly, the way these women speak to each other. But with Hannah, I really wanted her to become, as you know, I heard Gloria Steinem, actually it was an interview with Reese Witherspoon all the way back, in which she quoted Gloria Steinem, and Gloria Steinem saying that it was really important to watch women become the hero of their own life. Yeah. And I knew that I wanted Hannah to become the hero of her own life and the hero of Bailey's. So that was all the way in 2012. I was working on the book on and off. And then I had my son in 2016, and I realized, this is really the primal story of someone becoming a parent, and a parent in this case to a child that she didn't give birth to, and a parent all the same. And that made me reimagine the entire journey of what Hannah's heroism would mean, both for her and this child. And then it led to the book sitting in front of you.
Nice. So that leads me to my next question, because I really feel like motherhood is a really big theme in this book. I mean, the two main characters, Hannah and Bailey, who are at the center of the story, are both motherless, really, in different ways. And so can you talk a little bit about why you wanted that to be the core of your story?
I think that I'm really always interested in triangulation and the way that things play out. Often between two people, there's a third person involved. And what I had seen done in a lot of instances is that you see a stepdaughter and a stepmother competing for the husband/father's affection. And what I wanted here was that both of them were very certain in that affection. So that wasn't the triangle that was sort of creating the friction. And I wanted there to be another triangle creating the friction instead. And what I thought it was is that both of them in their lives never had this mother figure. So the triangle here was sort of the ghost of motherhood, right? And the way that connected the two of them, and at first kept them apart because Hannah was not sure how to be a mother. She didn't have a model for it. And Bailey wasn't sure how to be mothered. She had never had a mother in her life since she was a young girl. And then ultimately the journey toward them filling that gap for each other in a way that I hope is surprising.
Yeah, it was. And I mean, I'm like looking at my questions here and I'm thinking, okay, which one do I want to go to next? So can we talk about your characters a little bit? Like, when you create characters, how do you approach them? Do you approach them and try to flesh them out all before you start to write, or do they come to you more as you are writing them?
So for me, I'm sorry that the thing just beeped. I don't know how to work my computer. For me, I always start, and then after I answer this, I'm going to flip this same question back to you, Julie, because I'm fascinated by the creation of both the women in The Last Flight. And so I'm interested in how you came to that. So just, I'm telling you right now.
Okay, all right,
We'll
all
turn
right.
it in a minute. But I was going to say that for me, I always start with a question. And for this book, the question was, do we ever know the people closest to us? Do we ever know the people we really love? And I knew about Hannah that was going to be the question she was asking. And I knew that there was going to be a stepdaughter involved, but I didn't know more than that. I wrote that first chapter, 8 years ago, and I had no idea where it was going to go. I knew the husband disappeared at different points in my writing process. That character had a very different dynamic with the two of them. And I really sort of let then the story take over for me. And it sounds kind of corny, but I like to see the way the characters sort of teach me who they are as they're in conversation with each other and in conversation with the plot points. And to that end, for me, writing really becomes about rewriting. That first draft, I only know that question, and I try to write into it. And then the second draft, I start to look at themes and characters and the way they talk to each other. And I often end up throwing out a lot of that first draft and reimagining it in terms of this specific journey I found that these characters were going on. And as I go deeper and deeper into the writing process, there's a lot of throwing out and starting over and reimagining until the characters sort of crystallize for me. Mm-hmm. And in terms of this too, Hannah really crystallized when I realized, as we were just talking about, that this was the story of her journey to motherhood. And I went back then and reimagined in that way, and without ruining anything, the third figure here, Owen, he in the original drafts took on a very different life force than he does in the final version. And so much so that a whole section of the novel was his, and now it's not. And I think for me, in terms of the idea of, do I know where these characters go or who these characters are, I had to accept that Owen's journey was going to be a very different journey than I initially imagined. And in doing that, it took a long time for me to allow his journey to change in that way. And when I did, then the real love story here concretized. And so now I want to ask you too the same question about The Last Flight and how you created those characters, if I may.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of approach it the same way as you. So I think about a what if situation. And in my situation, it was, what if a woman was so desperate to disappear that she was willing to do anything, like even trade a plane ticket at an airport in order to escape. And from there, my characters sort of fit my purpose for what I need them to be. So as I'm writing them, I'm getting to know them. So first draft characters are nothing like last draft characters. They're like completely different people. They just share a name, and sometimes not even that. And as you write every draft, you dig deep. As soon as you start realizing, because you start looking at them as if they're real people, and you have questions about them like you would have anybody that you just met, like, where did you grow up and what was your family like? And the strange thing about being an author is that you still have those questions about your character, but you are also, it's almost like you're a dual personality. You're asking the question and then you're changing seats and answering the question, because you're the one that has to invent all of that stuff, which is wonderful, because when you're inventing characters, they can start off as a dog walker and end up as a geneticist. And it's just, look how easy that was. This morning she was a manager of a dog rescue, and by the evening she had her PhD in genetics. And, that's a wonderful thing, but it really does take time, I think, to get to know them and to kind of live with them on the page for a while before they really start feeling real. Mm-hmm. But you're there, you're there at the end. Yeah.
Totally.
All right. You talked a little bit about Owen. And so one of my questions was that Owen is really only appearing in flashbacks.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious, what kind of person did you want the reader to know him to be?
So that central question I have at the beginning, do you ever fully know anyone? Do you know the people you love? I wanted Owen to feel, at least at the beginning, like Hannah could be right about him or Hannah could be wrong about him.
Mhm.
And over the course of the flashbacks, I'm hoping that the reader develops their own opinion on who he is, not based. I like to think that, you know, it's interesting when you talk what you were just talking about in terms of you want to know where your character's from and that they're telling you stories. And I like the idea that beneath the details we share about ourselves, there's a soulfulness that is who we are. And so even if it turns out you were wrong about some of the details about someone, you can still know who they are at their, who he or she is at his core or her core. And for Owen, what I'm hoping is that even though, you know, as we get a little deeper into the novel, you're going to be surprised probably about some of the things that he chose not to share with Hannah about his life, that you still almost feel how she feels, that at your core, you understand who that person is.
Mhm.
And, you know, it begs the question, what it means to invest with someone, what it means to trust someone over, you know, I have this idea that I think about in terms of all my books, and especially here, what does it mean to be the witness to someone's life? And it's easy in some ways to think that that means, you know, you're at their birthdays and you're at their graduation, you know, in terms of even a parent-child relationship, a romantic relationship, what have you. But also, and this is what I really wanted to dig into here, Hannah being the witness to Owen's life and Owen being the witness to Hannah's life ended up giving her the clues she needed to find her way forward. And that is not based on any of the sort of biographical details, but rather on who he is and who he revealed himself to be in the moments when he let his guard down, like the way we all hope we do with the people we love. You know, and I actually, to that end, because I do think in that way, this book really exists, you know, there's the sort of forward facing action of the present, and then the unpacking that happens in the parts that take place in the past, all the flashback chapters. And for me, the way I wrote that was really in conjunction with each other. I understood one in terms of the other. And in terms of The Last Flight, I'm just really interested too, because you have these two timelines in a different way. And they're happening at the same time, but I should say these two storylines that are both speaking to each other and are also quite separate. And I'm interested in hearing about, if you would share with us all, did you write those timelines, those storylines in conjunction with each other, or did you imagine them separately? How did they come? Because they really speak to each other so beautifully.
I wrote them consecutively. So I sat down and wrote the beginning Claire chapters all the way up until they meet at the airport. And that's, you know, Eva's first scene. And at that point from there, I tried to go back and forth just because I needed, you know, there's that concept when you're writing a dual POV of the handoff, you know, the end of one chapter and the beginning of a different POV. You need to have some thread connecting them. And that thread can be an object. That thread could be a place. That thread could be just a feeling, you know, if one's scared and the other's scared, there's your handoff. And so I really felt like, because I'm relatively a new writer, I've only been doing this for, you know, maybe 5 or 6 years, that I felt like I couldn't approach it as writing the entire story of Claire and then writing the entire story of Eva and then fitting them together that way. I really needed to go through and go back and forth, which was, I don't know that I would do that again, but that was how I approached it this time.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting.
All right, okay, I was like, okay, my turn. All right, so Sausalito, you picked Sausalito. Why? Why did you pick Sausalito? Is that a special place for you? Was there a reason, like, for the plot that you needed them to live there? What is it? Because the setting in your book is just so vivid, and Sausalito is such a vivid place. I just was curious about that.
So for me, I always like to pick communities that are sort of on the end of the edge of the world in some way, like, because I think it requires a different thing a different responsibility of its inhabitants. And so when I imagine the floating homes, you know, that specific community where they lived, and I spent some time there, it's, you know, the people that live there in these small, in that community particularly, but in any small community, you know each other in sort of, you feel like you have an intimacy in a different way than if you live in a big city and it's more anonymous. And yet you don't really know each other too. Both are going hands in hand. And I like to sort of cull that sense of place into how it influences how people interact with each other when it's in such close quarters. So that's one of the reasons I picked Sausalito, and specifically this floating home community. And, you know, we're in the process right now of turning this novel, my husband and I are writing it as a television show, limited series. And so we just went back to the floating homes. And I sort of was showing him, this is where Hannah lives. My poor 4-year-old was so confused. He's like, is Hannah real? Or is Hannah I don't know what's going on exactly, but he's like, and Bailey lives there. So he doesn't understand. He's heard their name so many times now,
Right.
but I like to pick a small community like that and sort of embed myself in it in a certain way. And then like I do Hannah's walk to work and where she actually eats, and sort of experiencing all that as a way to understand. I feel like place so influences us in a different way. And, you know, speaking of place, we both live in Santa Monica. We both live so near to each other. And I'm also interested in hearing about, because something that is so fascinating in your book, place plays such a big role, but also the idea, I mean, can we pull back for a second? Cause can you just tell everyone, but you told a little bit, but you know, it starts with the plane ride for both of them.
Okay. You want me to talk? Okay. So The Last Flight is a book about Claire Cook, who is married to a famous, very well-known and beloved into a political family, kind of like the Kennedys, but not quite the Kennedys, like maybe 2 steps down from the Kennedys, but still everybody loves them. And what they don't know is that behind closed doors, Rory is abusive and dangerous. And Claire is not a victim. She is fed up and she's sick of it. And so she's created a plan to leave. She's used all of their family resources to squirrel money away. She's put a ton of money away. She's bought a fake ID, a fake passport, fake everything. She's got this whole plan to disappear across the border in Detroit and, you know, just disappear. And of course, that plan falls apart. Her husband is, you know, minutes away, hours away from discovering what she was about to do. And she finds herself at JFK, desperate, looking for any escape possible, when she meets Eva, who is a woman also on the run and desperate to escape something. And so the 2 women hatch a plan to trade plane tickets. So Claire thinks, oh, I'll travel to Oakland as Eva on Eva's ticket, and Eva can travel to Puerto Rico as me on my ticket. And when we get off on the other end, we'll be, you know, no one will think to look for me in Oakland. No one will think to look for Eva in Puerto Rico. But when Claire lands in Oakland, she sees on the news that the Puerto Rico flight crashed. And so she's stuck in Oakland. She has Eva's purse, her keys, her ID, everything. News of her death is about to, you know, break across all the, you know, television stations, and she needs a place to hide out. So she goes to Eva's house to hide out. And as she's in Eva's house, she starts learning more and more about Eva, and that Eva was not truthful with her about who she was or what she was running from. And Claire is not aware of it at the beginning, but soon becomes aware that there are people in Berkeley who have noticed that Eva has gone missing and that Claire is there in her place. So,
and my question for you off of that is, in terms of, and I will not ruin it because it's so great what happens, but did you know, and I forget what you told me, as I think we've talked about this, but I'm actually now wondering truly for myself too. Did you know at the beginning what happened to each of them?
Yeah. I have to know, or I can't write forward. I have to know the end of my book. Otherwise I'm just kind of writing in circles, you know.
So it's so interesting. That's what I thought you had told me. And so we have the exact opposite process.
Oh, you don't know? You don't know the ending?
Never know.
Oh my gosh. I am like a lone person in a paddle boat, paddling, turning in circles if I don't know the ending. It's just a ton of work going nowhere.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I never know. And in fact, like for me, sometimes that I think it creates more drafts, definitely. But then it's almost like it creates a meditative quality for the writing to me that then I want to know. It's why I sit down every day to sort of figure out and find out what happens. So, you know, but it's so interesting to me always with writers, that it's usually one camp or another. You know, you have to know or you can't know. There's sort of no in between. There's this great quote by E.L. Doctorow when I was in graduate school that they taught us, or my teacher mentioned that always stuck with me. And this is sort of how I think about how I write, which is writing a novel is like, it's like driving at night. You can see beyond your headlights, but you can't see further than that. And that's always sort of how I think about it. But it makes writing a thriller particularly a much different endeavor. Maybe I'm just started working on a new thriller. When I say just started, I'm literally on page 2. So it's very new. But part of me is like, maybe I should experiment this time around with knowing the ending. And we'll see if maybe it's not 8 years.
The hard part about knowing the ending is that you're very heavy-handed in your drafts leading up to it, right? Like because you know. And so I will say that some of my best twists in The Last Flight are really well executed, because when I wrote the book originally, those twists weren't there. And so as I wrote, so you're not really seeing the very many hints. I had to go back and layer a few in just so that my readers wouldn't be mad at me. And so I do think that there is a trade-off. You have to have a little bit of both. You can't go, I'm not like an outliner where I'm like, okay, in chapter 4, they're going to have this, and then this is going to be the trick, and this is going to be the twist. A lot of that is like self-discovery through the draft. But I at least need to know, if this character is ending up here or ending down here, you know? And so I did know that. I did know that.
That's so interesting.
All right. So tell me a little bit about the research you did to do this book. Like, you know, you mentioned you went to Sausalito. Did you also, part of this book takes place in Austin. Did you go to Austin as well?
I did go to Austin as well. I went to Austin a few years ago, and then I went again right before the world shut down in February 2020. And I was already kind of nervous, and I almost canceled my trip because I had friends in New York who were already starting to get nervous. And then I thought, if I don't go now, what if I don't go? And I felt like I really needed to go and just do a final few days in Austin. And I did everything in the book that they do. I did all the places they go in the book. I went and spent time. And I really, research is so sort of critical for how I think about writing and imagine it. And I often do it at later stages, and then things shift and alter accordingly. But like, you know, there's one scene in the book that's a sort of important scene in which they're eating ginger pancakes at midnight. So I go and I ate the ginger pancakes at midnight, and things like that I really like. And I drove out to a house that's going to play a big part in the book, and I imagine the house and I see the street. And for me, that's both the reward of the writing and also very illuminating. I really, that becomes an important part for me. And when I was in Austin, actually, it's so funny because in Los Angeles, you would think there's like more celebrity sightings or what have you. But when I was in Los Angeles, I was staying at a hotel, and into the lobby, you know, one of the most quintessential Texas stories is, for me, at least Friday Night Lights, you know, the movie and the TV show. And into the lobby walked Peter Berg, who was the director of both the movie and the TV show. And I walked past him and I could not help myself. And I whispered, clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose. And he kind of looked at me and he was like, kind of smiled and kind of like, oh, she might be crazy. So it was a very quick, very quick exchange. But it felt like, oh my gosh, that's my reward for going back to Austin and sort of spending a few days there. But I actually had a piece of the novel takes place at UT Austin, and I spent some time with some students there. I sat in the classroom where something takes place. I really love doing that research and sort of sitting inside my characters' lives for a little bit. Before I had my son, with my previous novels, I would actually go live where the book took place. So 800 Grapes, my husband and I moved up to Sonoma County for a little while. So, you know, the big bargaining tool was, and now, you know, we're were more in place while he's young, particularly. But my husband's always making pitches for like, well, maybe your next book should take place in Hawaii. He's a writer as well, so you could go to Hawaii for a little while or what have you.
Yeah,
But
I was gonna say maybe Italy, San Marino,
exactly.
I have a lot of ideas.
The Amalfi Coast and yes. Can I ask too how you pick the places in this book? Oakland is so vivid in this story, particularly.
Yeah, Berkeley is a really special place to me, and I worked there for a number of years right out of college. And so for me, I always wanted to go back there, and I have this fantasy of moving back there someday.
Yeah.
But you and I have already talked about, once you leave LA, it's like impossible to come back. You price yourself out of the market, kind of.
Yeah.
So you have to think long and hard about whether you ever will leave Los Angeles and be ready to leave it forever. Exactly. But Berkeley is a really special place for me. And so I did a little bit of what you did, and I haven't done that with, well, my first book takes place in Los Angeles, so that wasn't too hard. But, with The Last Flight, I really did go up to Berkeley. I used it as an excuse to go back, and I walked the campus again and got the feel for, what it was like, what it smelled like, what it sounded like. I walked through the stadium. I spent my time, I walked down by the coffee shop where Kelly works and sat on the bench that Claire sits on in the early morning hours of her first full day in Berkeley, realizing what has happened, and sat on the bench that I had Claire sitting on, looking out across the expansive lawn down to the library and the bells tolling the campanile. And so I really just wanted to infuse that time. I had my kids with me too. And so my oldest son, who was, I want to say 12 at the time, he's 15 now. He wanted to walk the streets with me and see where Eva and Claire lived and all of that. But Berkeley streets are super hilly and windy. And he was just like, can we be done? Please, can we be done? Like there was a lot of complaining. And, a lot of like, let's go back to the hotel. Let's go back. I want to go swimming, so kind of put a damper on it a little bit. I think my next trip will probably be by myself.
Yeah.
So you have Hannah and Bailey going on a quest, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. And so the idea of a quest in literature is always so exciting for readers because, anytime, when they looked at each other and said, well, we need to go to Austin, as a reader, I was like, we're going to Austin, I'm so excited. I love the quest. But how do you balance, and I think this is more of a writer question, how do you balance the details and the minutia of a quest so that you're not like loading on all of the information, like front loading all the information for your reader? Like, how do you balance that? Because you did that really, really well. You had them discovering things that they needed to discover, but you weren't heavy-handed about it at all.
Well, thank you for saying that. I think it's hard. I actually think that's one of the hardest aspects of a quest because the very nature of it means there's going to be a lot of shoe leather that they have to do. And I think for me, one of the ways that I think I always think about a book, and here particularly, is that I knew I wanted it all to take place in 72 hours. I wanted most of it, and not the backstory, but the front story.
Yeah.
Which allowed me to keep them moving in a way and noticing what they're noticing there without having to handle the rest. It needed to be their picture of Austin, their understanding of how being in this new area was going to inform their journey and not have to sort of weigh it down with other details. I think that's one of the other reasons I like doing research so much, which is that, I feel like if you're writing about a dentist, but you don't spend time with a dentist, then you write about cavities because that's the first thing you think about when you think about a dentist. But if you actually go and spend the time with a dentist, if you actually go and spend the time in Austin, then you're finding the more interesting detail. And then it becomes less of the shoe leather because instead of writing about a cavity, let's say, you're writing about what a dentist does to close up for the day, which no one has really thought about. And then it's sort of interesting. So that's something else. I think if you are going to ask your reader to go on a quest, you kind of have to go on that quest too.
I agree with that. And that, I think, is what makes it so well done, is that you actually did that. There's a lot that you can do as an author using Google, but there's a lot that you can't do. There's just you can look at pictures and you can read, about a place, and you can, put up the pictures around your writing desk and have a feel for the place, but not a feel for the vibe, right? You can't pick up a vibe from a picture or the internet,
Yes, I totally agree with that.
So, you talked about how long this book took, but like, can you tell us a little bit about how long a typical book takes you to write? I mean, this one was, incredibly, like, unusually long because other things kept happening in between. But like, let's take 800 Grapes, for instance, which was also a fabulous book. How long did that book take you from beginning to end to write? Like, what was your process?
That took 18 months. And all my previous books before this one, the 5 previous books I've written, all took 18 months. So this was, by far the longest, in and out. But, in between my different novels, I always start a novel that takes place in Big Sur. And then I always end up throwing it away. I'm obsessed with Big Sur. It's one of my favorite places in the world. And I keep putting stories there. And then I haven't found the story that sort of feels like the story I need to tell about that place.
I love Big Sur too.
Yeah. So I say 18 months from the time I start writing the book. I feel like I'm supposed to be writing, but there's always that in between period. Right now, the new book takes place in Big Sur. Does not speak. It doesn't suggest the book is going to stand the test of time, because my Big Sur books end up, sort of going.
Now, 18 months from beginning to draft until you turn it into your editor as a finished copy, or it lands on the shelves? Not lands on the shelves.
No, 18 months.
Yeah.
But when the final copy edit is done, but not before it goes.
Not gone into.
I wouldn't even. Sometimes the final copy edit even takes longer than that. But it's accepted manuscript, and we're doing a copy edit. So how about you for your first?
That's about the same, I would say. About the same. And I think that it shows, I think that it shows that you take the time to really get to know your characters and that it's not rushed. Do you think that you will go back to 18 months, kind of that pace? Or do you think, obviously you're not going to do another 7-year project.
Yeah.
But do you think that there might be a happy medium in between the two, or does 18 months feel like a reasonable amount of time for you as a writer?
I think 18 months feels good. I have some writer friends who write a book every year. I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
But I think 18 months feels like the right amount of time when you're in there. Over the 8 years that I was working on this, I wrote 2 other books.
Right.
So I don't know, it was living with me, but I wasn't working on it every day. I wonder maybe how many days I worked on it. Was probably 3 years. But I do feel like if you're living with it, it's still with you.
Yeah. You're working on a book when you're not even sitting at your desk. You're working on a book. So yeah. Okay. Looking at the time. Oh, all right. So I think we're going to open it up to questions at this point, Karen.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a question. Audience, don't forget, you can ask all of your questions in the chat. So Laura, are you writing the screen adaptation?
Oh, I was going to ask that question. Okay, good.
Yes, I am. So we're writing it. It's Julia Roberts is going to play Hannah. And my husband and I are writing it together. It's a 7-episode show for Apple TV. And we wrote the pilot, and we have a small writer's room of, these brilliant, wonderful writers. And we're all writing it. We're writing the show together. So that's exciting. And we're almost done. Everyone's sort of off on their episodes. I'm late on my next one, but I'm given a pass because I'm married to my co-creator. And, we're going to be done by the end of May, and we hope to be shooting we're either going to be shooting in September or January. I'll know that in the next couple of weeks.
So now, are there challenges with that? And how different is it writing a show from doing a novel?
You know, it is so different. And I think it has really different requirements for what the writer needs to do. So much of a show, so much of a novel can be internal, and so much of a show or a movie has to be actualized in a way that's cinematic and physical. And it's a learning process. You know, this isn't my first screenplay. I wrote the screenplay for 800 Grapes, and then for my other book, Hello Sunshine. I feel like I'm finally getting in the groove of how to do it in a different way now. And but it's a different beast. And I'm always a big believer in killing your darlings anyway, even within a novel, but certainly in moving from a novel to a script, you're killing all the darlings. You're killing all sorts of things in order to serve a cinematic story. And so it's definitely a very different process. And this is the first time I would say I'm actually enjoying it. I did not enjoy it with the last two in the same way. This is fun. And I think part of it is fun because the writers we're working with are so great and so excited. And also Julia Roberts, I mean, that's a dream, to get to write words and imagine her saying them. And it's a great excuse to do research. Pelican Brief, Erin Brockovich, it's all research now. In the middle of the day, if my husband comes downstairs and sees me watching Erin Brockovich, I'm working. That's work.
Right.
So,
Right.
so
Julie,
yeah.
did you have another question?
No, you asked it actually.
Oh, okay.
Right up from
So we have another question. When Hannah meets Owen, why does she accidentally call him another name?
So that is such a good question. I don't know if that's from someone in the audience, but no one has asked me that question. And it was on purpose in the writing, because I love the idea, and this idea of, can we really know somebody, that somewhere deep in her subconscious, even from go, she sensed there was something else going on. And actually, which no one also has asked me, and I don't want to ruin it, but now that we're in this audience, she calls him by a name that is going to take on a real importance in the book. I will just say that. So when you note that she's calling him by the wrong name, and then later in the book, that name takes on a real import, and that was on purpose.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
And so going in, you knew that was going to happen.
I knew it only when they met. And so I only know certain things. I knew that name was very important to who he really was. I like the idea that we're meeting and re-meeting people, you know, in a variety of different ways. And she sensed something. She sensed a familiarity, which made her break down her walls and sort of pursue this relationship where normally she wouldn't, and made him do the same thing. And the idea that in the face of that, she also sensed something else was going on. And that didn't scare her away from him.
So we have another question. How did you, and Julie, you can answer too, during this whole pandemic, how have you stayed creative?
Well, I will answer by saying that our house has been an interesting place. As I said, my husband's also a writer. He's a screenwriter, and we have a very young child who was not in school. And it was the two of us navigating, taking care of him on our own, without any childcare, while both trying to write and also then trying to write together. So there was a lot of late nights and very early mornings. And I think in some ways, you know, people joked with me, like, your life isn't that different during COVID than out of COVID. You know, you're still kind of at home and handling it, but it felt very different. And I think I had to allow myself at different points the grace of saying, I'm not going to be working today. I'm not going to be working this week, and that's okay. And the work can look like something else. And sort of, you know, my writing pattern was always that I would write at a coffee shop, which now has closed down in the middle of COVID. It was called The Tavern, the Larder, on San Vicente, and I would write there every morning. And just the mere fact that, you know, all of a sudden now this was where I was writing, you have to get used to that. So I had to create new rituals and new experiences around that. Thank goodness. I am a very big believer in my morning coffee. And one of the things that happened right before COVID was my husband and I realized the astronomical amount of money that we were spending on coffee. So for his present, I got him a very fancy coffee maker, and he has become our in-house barista. And Julie actually had one of his coffees a couple weeks ago.
He's very good at it. Very good at it. Yeah.
And so I got my coffee. And then the other thing that sort of kept me sane during COVID was the music has always played a huge role in how I write and how I think about writing. And I still sit down, I put my headphones on, and I have the song that I listen to on repeat while I'm working. And that stayed the same and sort of fueled my creative life in that way.
What song did you listen to when you wrote this book?
It's If I Should Fall Behind by Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band.
But I love that song.
The beautiful song, and it's a live version of that song. It's on his album Live in New York City. So he is singing it with the entire band. They all take a verse, and it's really beautiful. And so that's sort of how I did it. Julie, I'm so interested how you did it during COVID.
Well, my kids are older than yours, so I have teenagers, so they're pretty much like, go away, you know. So I had I did not feel like I was doing very much hands-on parenting. A lot of my day was spent with one kid or the other saying like, don't come in my room, I'm about to have a meeting, you know, on their Zooms with whoever they were Zooming with or FaceTiming with. But I kept my writing routine pretty much the same. I wake up early in the morning and write because I teach during the day. So I write before school. So I'm usually done with my writing by 6 in the morning, and I'm off, you know, walking the dog, getting ready to get my day started in the other job that I do. So for me, that didn't really change. You know, I kind of thought with, you know, school closures and everything, like, oh, I'm going to have all this extra time to write. But you just do your routine. And I think that sometimes when you try to force your routine to be more than it needs to be, you end up getting in your own way, you know?
I totally agree.
So, you know, I think that a lot of times authors feel like, oh, I have all this extra time, I need to use it toward creating whatever, you know, piece of writing that I'm working on. And that I think is counterintuitive to actually how a book gets written, because you can't force it. You can't think you're going to get extra hours and get ahead, because most of what makes a book great happens in the revision and the thinking and the cooking and the, you know, incubating time. And you can't like fast forward through that.
Yeah.
And, you know, you just can't. So I didn't get any extra work done. That's the short answer.
So, Laura, is there a personal connection or reason to choosing the particular dish that Hannah tries to make for Bailey?
So that's a great question too. I love cooking. It's sort of, especially because I work at home, it's always been how I divide my day. Sort of around 4 o'clock, I go, computer shuts, and I, you know, and also a lot of days the computer shuts way before that, but that's when I start cooking. And I found in this book with that dish, I wanted to pick something. I actually I make that dish, and I wanted to pick something that it's pretty easy, and that Hannah still kind of messes up, just to show also how hard it is when we're trying so hard in the wrong way to do something right. And, you know, at this moment, she so wants to do this for Bailey, the pasta, and in the middle of this, she gets the protect her note and all of this happens. And so she burns that pasta and sort of ruins it. And now actually I just filmed a video, which is going to be on Reese Witherspoon's book club page, of how to make Hannah's redemption pasta. So that's coming out in the next couple of days. And I show how to cook the pasta properly. And so, you know, I did the video the other day early in the morning, and then there I am at, you know, 8 o'clock in the morning, downing this bowl of brown butter sage pasta. And I'm not sorry about it. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
So.
So now, Laura, Julie has a routine of when she writes, and do you have a routine?
I do have a routine, which I always try to stick to. I have to write first thing in the morning. If I don't, if I start checking the news or checking the internet or social media or anything like that, it's over. So I write when I think when you first wake up, you're a little more sleepy and vulnerable, and you're hard on yourself. And so I always try to write then. If I haven't started by 11 or 12, the day's over, and I try to do something else, writing adjacent, reading, researching. But to put pen to paper, I really start, first thing in the morning, headphones on, if I should fall behind on, cup of coffee with me. Which is wonderful because, in terms of splitting the childcare, my husband likes to write at night. So we're exactly opposite. So he has no trouble if I'm the one that wants to be up at 6 working and then take over later in the day.
I have to say, everybody, after they read the last thing you told me, they have to read the acknowledgments, because that's what I love to read. And you talk about the coffee with your husband, which I just think is totally, I'm so glad that you mentioned it, because everybody, when you get the book, you finish it, you read the acknowledgments, because it's really, really, it was fabulous. So I loved it. So a question, when people finish the book, what do you want them to feel, or what do you want them to take away from it?
So that's a great question. I'm not quite sure how to answer it without ruining the ending, but I think that the ending is something that people are feeling different ways about. I hope it's eliciting a real emotional response, which is what I wanted. I think of the entire book as a call and an answer, and the ending is the answer. And the call is a call that Hannah didn't know she was getting at the beginning of the book. So I would say that I hope that they feel like that is an answer they're happy with. And then, I love an ending that feels complicated and hopeful. It's one of the things I love so much about Julie's book, without ruining the ending, is you have that experience of the last flight feeling both complicated and hopeful, as opposed to a bow wrapped around anything. And that's sort of the sweet spot that I'm always trying to write toward.
Yeah, your ending felt really true to me, just true to life. Very much so. Yeah.
So Julie, how do you want, after people finish your book, what do you want them to take away from it? What do you want them to feel?
I think, female empowerment was a big theme in my book. I really feel like, how we talk about women on the page in this world that we live in these days is really important. So I really wanted people to see two strong, savvy women who were maybe not in the best of circumstances, who perhaps made bad decisions based on the information that they had at the time, as we all do, and see them fighting to, rectify their mistakes and not just be victims. And so neither of my characters, even though bad things have happened to them, feel a lot of agency toward fixing and getting their life back to what they want. I also want people thinking about the power of female friendship, in a world where women are often encouraged to, tear each other down. Female friendship is really sort of the basis of where I think we all need to start and move forward from that. So those are probably two of the main things.
Now I'm going to ask a fun question of both of you. So we'll start with you, Laura. What is a surprising, what is there something about you that you would surprise everybody here?
That's a good question. What would surprise everyone about me here? Well, I don't know how surprising this is, but as much as I love cooking, I hate driving, which when you live in Los Angeles is a weird thing to hate. And I'm a terrible driver. So I walk everywhere. I pretty much walk everywhere except to take my son to school. And in Los Angeles, even in Santa Monica, that's not a common thing. So I think that that's something that's surprising. And then the other thing I would say is what I shared, which is that I listen to one song on repeat the entire time I'm writing a book.
Very good. Julie?
I think that, as Laura kind of joked about how, her life really didn't change that much from COVID, like my life really didn't change that much. I am a huge introvert. So, while everyone else was struggling with, oh gosh, I miss going out to eat at restaurants, and I miss going out to the movies, and I miss going to concerts. And I'm like, I don't ever do any of those things anyway. So I'm good. I think the one thing that I missed the most was going to the supermarket. I missed that. I did not like ordering online groceries. That felt very voyeuristic to me. I felt very uncomfortable with that. Yeah.
I like it. So as a final question, I'd like to ask, as a bookseller, if I'm on the floor, I have 10 seconds probably to sell a book to someone. So Julie, I'm going to have you do the 10-second pitch for Laura's book. And Laura, I'm going to ask you to do the pitch for Julie's book.
Great.
Both booksellers.
All right.
And everybody out here is
All right, I'm gonna have to think of it. Okay, so I think that the last thing he told me is really, it's a thriller, but it's an emotional thriller. It has that third rail where the characters aren't just trying to get to the end and win or, accomplish something or survive. The characters are really trying to, the thrilling part about this book is the self-discovery that the characters have to go through. But it absolutely has that, that heat of tension where, the notes protect her is the driving force all the way through. And you're turning the pages and you're turning the pages and you're turning the pages to try to figure out why and what she has to protect this girl from. And so for me, this book hits that sweet spot between really tense pacing and really excellent plot and character development. So.
Perfect. Okay, Laura.
Well, this is the best 10 seconds I've had because I love this book, as Julie knows. So what I would actually say is you're going to have to read this. You just have to trust me. But if someone said, well, I don't trust you because I just met you in the bookstore, then I would say this book lets you imagine what it would be if you could turn off your life and pick up in someone else's skin and what that might feel like. Mm. And it's going to lead you with two women making that decision into two places you would never expect that they would end up going. And you're going to like watching where they both go.
You did a better job than I did. I feel like you need another start.
Well, and also I would say too that for me, I always have a day book and a night book. So my day book is a book that, requires a little bit more commitment, maybe is serious. And then a night book is one that you escape into. But my sweet spot is when my day book and my night book converge. And that doesn't happen very much. And The Last Flight converged for me. It became my day and my night book.
Wow. Thank you.
This has been totally amazing. The two of you, just superstar authors. It has just been our honor and privilege to have you. The audience was spectacular. Thank you for sharing your time and your energy with us. And please come back. Please, please, please come back because we'd love to have you both again.
And I can't wait to be at RJ Julie in person. I'm hoping this summer to come and say hello.
Yay.
Planning our trip back east in August. So I definitely will do that.
Hooray. We look forward to it. So don't forget everybody to buy your copy. Bye. RJJulia.com.
Thank you. It's been a blast. And Laura, we'll talk.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you all for coming.
Bye,
Thank you.
Good
everyone.
night,
Thank
everybody.
you.
We'll see you at the bookstore.